And so John's vision here pulls from the Old Testament. The way he records it pulls from the Old Testament, from imagery in Ezekiel. And Ezekiel had a vision also of the river. And his vision is a lot more, or his record of the vision is a lot more elaborate. And it's back in Ezekiel 47, one of my favorite passages of all times. He brought me back to the door of the house, and behold, water was flowing from under the threshold of the house toward the east. For the house faced east, and the water was flowing down from the right side of the house, from the south of the altar. And he brought me out of the way of the north gate, and led me around on the outside to the outer gate by the way facing the east. And behold, water was spurting out from the south side. When the man went out toward the east with a line in his hand, he measured 1,000 cubits. And he led me through the water reaching to the ankles. And again he measured 1,000, and led me through the water reaching to the knees. And again he measured 1,000, and led me through the water reaching the hips. And he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not wade across, because the water had risen enough water to swim in, a river that could not be crossed by wading. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he brought me back to the bank of the river, and when I had returned, behold, on the bank of the river there were very many trees on the one side and on the other. And he said to me, These waters go out toward the eastern region and go down into the Arabah. That's the desert around the sea, the Dead Sea. And then they go toward the sea, that's the Mediterranean Sea, being made to flow into the sea, and the waters of the sea become fresh. And it will come about that every living creature which swarms in every place where the river goes will live, and there will be very many fish, for these waters go there, and the others become fresh, so that everything will live where the river goes. And it will come about that fishermen will stand beside it, from Engedi to Eneglaim, and there will be a place for the spreading of nets, and their fish will be according to their kinds, like the fish of the great sea, very many. But its swamps and marshes will not become fresh, they will be left for salt. And by the river on its bank on one side and on the other will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, and their fruit will not fail, and they will bear fruit every month, because their water flows from the sanctuary, and their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. So we think about, this is the vision that John would have been thinking about as he wrote about this, or even as he saw. And there's some differences, there's some similarities here, there's some differences that I think are important to point out, or useful to point out. One is that Ezekiel's river flows from the threshold of the temple. And John's river flows from the throne of God and the Lamb. But we see when we read this that there is no temple in the New Jerusalem, because God is its temple. And so flowing from the altar, the place where God's sacrifices are given, and flowing from the very throne of God really are the same thing, just a different way of envisioning it. John's vision also omits the river getting larger and deeper the further it flows. Ezekiel says we went 1,000 cubits. That's about 1,500 feet or so, and it was ankle deep for that long. And then we go another 1,500 feet, and it's a little deeper, and then a little deeper, and then it's too deep to even it's over our heads. And so it's something like that. But John's river seems to be limited to New Jerusalem. It doesn't appear to actually flow outside of the gates of New Jerusalem. But New Jerusalem, in John's vision, sees all life within its city. All life is there, and anything outside the city is something where there is spiritual death. And so, and as we see, John's New Jerusalem is huge. It's 1,500 miles across, and so on a side, and so we have this. this all underlines that what we're seeing is symbolic. It's not some literal cube that's come down out of heaven like the Borg came and did that. It's something symbolic that he's seen. And anyone can come into this holy city and drink the water of life if they leave the rebellion behind. That's the only requirement. Leave your rebellion behind and you can come in and drink from this. Another thing that is different that may be interesting to note is Ezekiel sees lots of trees on both sides of the river bearing fruit in each month. John seems to see one tree of life straddling the river, although his language could be interpreted as lots of trees on both sides that are just the same kind of tree. Bearing 12 kinds of fruit each month. And so John seems to see a more full realization of God's restoration than Ezekiel did. It's also, John's vision is also simpler than Ezekiel's. Another thing to note is that Ezekiel's leaves are only for healing, but John says they're for the healing of the nations. Ezekiel just says they're for healing, and he's just speaking here to Israel. But Ezekiel, if you read his vision, he's having a vision that is of the restoration of Israel. It's limited to the restoration of Israel. He doesn't see that this includes necessarily all people everywhere who would come in, all kingdoms and nations and tribes of the world. John sees God's redemption extending to all humanity. So they're related, but John's, while it's simpler and more compact, actually extends the vision that Ezekiel has to non-Jews and indeed to anyone who will believe. So let's look at some of this. Let's look at the bride. Let's look at the holy city. The angel's phrase, the bride, the wife of the Lamb, that's in chapter 21, verse 9. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, full of the seven last plagues, came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb."
And that's Mary, correct?
No, that's New Jerusalem. It's the city that's coming down out of heaven.
Wouldn't the Lamb be Jesus?
Yeah.
And
But Mary's not married to the Lamb. Mary's not married to Jesus. Mary's the mother of Jesus.
Well, and then, yes, sir. I was Mary and Mary, you know. Mary, Mary.
So, and it kind of seems redundant here. The bride, the wife of the Lamb, because a bride's obviously a wife. But two elements are brought together here. John is now going to see the nature of the bride. Now, the bride was introduced earlier, back in chapter 19, verse 7. Let's rejoice and be glad and give the glory to him, because the marriage of the Lamb has come and his bride has prepared herself. So at the second appearing, the second advent of Jesus, we need the marriage has come and his bride has prepared herself. And so she's appeared as the holy city, New Jerusalem, at the close of the vision of the judgment in 21:2. Back in 21:2, I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And so this identification emphasizes John's realization that New Jerusalem is associated with the Christian community. The bride's pure, bright garments, John says over in 19:8, are the righteous acts of the saints. And so, or the righteous deeds or acts of the saints. So the clothing of the bride are the righteous acts of the saints. So the bride are the saints, all those who have put their faith in Jesus, and the same as the New Jerusalem. They're all the same. They're different images of the exact same thing. And this is the opposite of the other, remember, the other woman that we have seen recently in this vision, the prostitute, the prostitute of Babylon. And the Christian community is characterized as having a faithful relationship with the Lamb. The Christian community is the bride, the wife of the Lamb, the one who is faithful to the Lamb, and in contrast to the prostitute who was unfaithful and just slept with anyone who would sleep with her. And he's brought there. Remember in 21:10, he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. He's in the Spirit. He's taken in the Spirit. And that's parallel to the same phrase that he uses when he talks about being introduced to the prostitute. He carried me away in the Spirit in 17:3. He carried me away into the Spirit to a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And so the prostitute and the bride are just different sides of the same reality. There is this reality of God coming into the world, and there will be some people who will faithfully respond to what God is doing through Jesus, and there are some who will reject. And those who are faithful and respond out of faithfulness and transformation, they become the bride of Christ, the New Jerusalem, and those who don't, they are part of the prostitute. They sleep with the prostitute. Two sides of the same thing, and there are different consequences for each. Those we've already seen, those who have associated with the prostitute, who aren't faithful to Christ, they are consumed in the lake of fire. And those now who are faithful, they form the New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ, the community of Christ, and live in His light and at His river of living water forever and ever. And we already do that, in fact. This kind of division is already happening. We already drink of the river of life, the water of the river of life, in this day, and will continue to do so forever. And so the fallen Babylon is unholy. New Jerusalem's first characteristic is that it is a holy city. And by holy, it partakes of the nature of God. Unholy, it rejects the nature of God. And so fallen Babylon rejects the nature of God, but we're talking about New Jerusalem, and it is a city that exudes and exemplifies God's nature. And the vision's going to reveal soon that New Jerusalem is a realm of healing and life. If you look in 22, verses 1 and 2, He showed me the river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street, on every side of the river, was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And so there's this this still going on here, and we are part of that, the healing of God, this holy city, a holistic order of being, in which human beings find the fullness of life for which we were created. But it comes down out of heaven. The New Jerusalem is coming down out of heaven from God. It's not something humans make up. You can't be good enough to be holy. It's a gift from God. And so it keeps coming down from heaven. And notice that it's something that continues to come down from heaven. The city is coming down. It's not just it came down or it will come down. It's not an accomplished fact. In fact, if you look back in the letter to Philadelphia, I want you to remember the 7 letters at the beginning. That highlights that aspect of the New Jerusalem, because Christ promises to write on those who are conquering the name of the city of God, to write on them the name of New Jerusalem that comes down from my God from out of heaven. It's in Revelation 3:12. The one who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will not go out from it anymore. And I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, in my new name. This was something that was written 2,000 years ago to actual historical people 2,000 years ago, and he's saying the New Jerusalem comes down from heaven. Not will come down from heaven, it was present, continuous kind of thing. And so we should think of the New Jerusalem as something that God is reserving for the end. Although, yes, the fullest expression will come at the end, but it's already been coming since Jesus raised from the dead. And so, speaking to a historical church in the midst of its own experience in a fallen world, Jesus doesn't speak of New Jerusalem as a future event, but as a present reality that's continuously coming down from God. Because remember, the victory of God has already been won in the resurrection of Jesus. Evil was broken in the death of Jesus on the cross, and the victory was realized when Jesus raised from the dead. And John uses the exact same form of the verb to the letter to Philadelphia as he does at the end back in chapter 21 and chapters 22 of the vision of the holy city. In the midst of ongoing history, New Jerusalem is a radical alternative to fallen Babylon. New Jerusalem is not something that's in reserve for when fallen Babylon is destroyed. New Jerusalem is already coming. And you live in it. You're a citizen of it. And then he also talks about the glory of God back here in chapter 21, verse 11, that it has having the glory of God. New Jerusalem having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very valuable stone, like the stone of crystal clear jasper. And so there's that jasper. And remember, God on the throne in Revelation chapter 4 had the image of, had the look of jasper. This is the nature of God. The city shows forth the very essence of God's being. New Jerusalem shines God's being into the world. That's why the world doesn't like the New Jerusalem, doesn't like the church. The